At 18 years old, most teens are worried about college applications and prom dates. But these four individuals were planning murders that would land them on America's death row. Welcome to Savage Case Files, where we expose the most shocking betrayals of innocence and explore the darkest corners of the American justice system. I'm your host, and today we're pulling back the curtain on cases that will challenge everything you think you know about youth and justice. Today, we're revealing the bone-chilling stories of the youngest killers awaiting execution, teens who committed crimes so heinous the state decided they deserved to die. These aren't your typical teenage mistakes. These are acts of violence so brutal, so premeditated, that judges and juries looked at these young faces and said, "You forfeit your right to live." From a satanic torture murder in Tennessee to the Boston Marathon bombing that terrorized a nation, from a revenge killing in Florida to a robbery-turned-execution in Ohio, we're about to journey through four cases that shattered communities and redefined how America views justice for young offenders. 4 cases. 4 death sentences. 4 lives that took the darkest possible turn before they could legally drink. These stories will force you to confront an uncomfortable question. At what age does someone become too dangerous to deserve mercy? The clock is ticking for these condemned teens. Let's examine how they got here and why their cases continue to spark fierce debate across America. Case 1. Krista Pike. Our first case takes us back to January 1995 in Knoxville, Tennessee, where 18-year-old Krista Pike was about to earn a place in criminal history as the youngest woman ever sentenced to death in the United States. Pike wasn't your average teenager. She had dropped out of high school and was attending a job training program, trying to get her life on track. But beneath her gothic appearance and rebellious attitude lay something far more dangerous, an obsession with the occult and a capacity for violence that would shock even hardened investigators. The trouble began with jealousy. Pike believed that 19-year-old Colleen Slimmer was trying to steal her boyfriend, Tatterell Shipp. What started as typical teenage drama would escalate into one of the most brutal murders in Tennessee history. On January 12, 1995, Pike convinced Slimmer to join her, Shipp, and another friend for what she claimed would be a harmless walk in a secluded area near the University of Tennessee campus. Slimmer had no idea she was walking into a trap that had been carefully planned for days. What happened next lasted 30 agonizing minutes. Pike and her accomplices tortured Slimmer with a box cutter and a small cleaver, but Pike wasn't satisfied with just killing her victim. She carved a pentagram into Slimmer's chest and bashed her skull with a chunk of asphalt. In a final act of depravity, Pike kept a piece of Slimmer's skull as a trophy, showing it off to classmates like a twisted souvenir. Pike's downfall came from her own arrogance. She couldn't resist bragging about the murder, even attempting to recruit others for additional killings. When police arrested her, they found the skull fragment in her jacket pocket, physical evidence that sealed her fate. The case moved swiftly through the courts. Pike showed no remorse during her trial, even laughing at crime scene photos. The jury took less than 3 hours to recommend death, making her the youngest woman on death row in America. Nearly 3 decades later, Pike remains Tennessee's only female death row inmate. Her lawyers have exhausted numerous appeals, including recent attempts to use emerging adult brain development research to argue that 18-year-olds shouldn't face execution, but the courts have consistently upheld her sentence. Today, at 47 years old, Pike continues to fight for her life from her cell on death row, while Colleen Slimmer's family still waits for justice to be served. Case 2. Michael Shane, Bargo, Jr. Our second case brings us to Marion County, Florida, in April 2011, where 18-year-old Michael Shane Bargo, Jr. was consumed by rage over a breakup that would cost an innocent teenager his life. Bargo had been dating Amber Wright, but their relationship ended when she moved on to 15-year-old Seth Jackson. What should have been typical teenage heartbreak transformed into something deadly when Bargo's jealousy reached a boiling point. He couldn't accept that Wright had chosen someone younger, and he began plotting revenge. On April 17, 2011, Bargo masterminded an elaborate scheme to lure Jackson to his death. Using Wright as bait, the group convinced Jackson to come to Charlie Ely's house in Summerfield, telling him it would be a chance to reconcile with his ex-girlfriend. Jackson, hoping to win Wright back, walked straight into the trap. The moment Jackson entered the house, Bargo and his accomplices attacked. They beat the 15-year-old with baseball bats, shot him multiple times, and tortured him for hours. But Bargo wasn't finished. Determined to eliminate all evidence, he forced the group to burn Jackson's body in a fire pit behind the house, then scattered the remains in different locations. Jackson's disappearance triggered a massive search effort. His mother, Sonia Jackson, pleaded on local news for her son's safe return, not knowing he was already dead. The investigation broke open when one of the accomplices cracked under pressure and led police to the burn site. The evidence against Bargo was overwhelming. Witnesses testified that he had been the ringleader, the one who pulled the trigger, and the one who insisted on burning the body. During his first trial in 2013, Bargo received a death sentence, but Florida's changing death penalty laws forced a resentencing. In 2019, a new jury heard the case again. This time, they unanimously recommended death, a requirement under Florida's revised capital punishment statutes. The judge agreed, sending Bargo back to death row. The Florida Supreme Court upheld Bargo's death sentence in 2021, rejecting his appeals and affirming that his crime warranted the ultimate punishment. His attorneys continue to file post-conviction motions, but legal experts believe his chances of avoiding execution are slim. Today, Bargo remains one of Florida's youngest death row inmates, while Seth Jackson's family continues to advocate for victims' rights and the swift implementation of his sentence. Case 3. Austin Gregory Myers. Our third case takes us to Butler County, Ohio, in September 2014, where 19-year-old Austin Gregory Myers hatched a plan that would make him the youngest person on Ohio's death row at the time. Myers wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a teenager who made a catastrophic decision that would destroy multiple lives, including his own. Along with his friend Timothy Mosley, Myers devised what they thought would be a simple robbery to get quick cash. Their target was 18-year-old Justin Back, someone they knew would be an easy mark. On September 29, 2014, Myers and Mosley lured Back to a remote location in Westchester Township under the pretense of a drug deal. Back, trusting and unsuspecting, had no idea he was walking into a death trap that the two teens had been planning for days. What happened next revealed the cold brutality lurking beneath Myers' youthful appearance. While Myers held Back down, restraining the victim's arms and legs, Mosley repeatedly stabbed him with a knife. Back fought desperately for his life, but the two attackers overpowered him. The robbery had escalated into murder, and Myers showed no hesitation in playing his part. The investigation moved quickly once Back's body was discovered. Physical evidence at the scene, combined with witness testimony, pointed directly to Myers and Mosley. During questioning, the full scope of their premeditation became clear. This wasn't a robbery that accidentally turned violent. They had planned to kill Back from the beginning. Myers' trial revealed disturbing details about his mindset leading up to the murder. Prosecutors argued that he was the mastermind behind the plot, the one who convinced Mosley to participate and who held Back down while his accomplice delivered the fatal wounds. The jury was particularly troubled by Myers' lack of remorse and his active participation in restraining the victim. In 2016, Myers was convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to death, making him Ohio's youngest death row inmate at just 21 years old. The Ohio Supreme Court unanimously affirmed his conviction and sentence in 2018, finding that the evidence clearly supported both his guilt and the appropriateness of capital punishment. Recent court rulings have allowed Myers' attorneys to explore additional mitigation issues, including his age and brain development at the time of the crime. However, these appeals face an uphill battle, given the premeditated nature of the murder and Myers' active role in restraining the victim. Today, Myers continues his appeals from Ohio's death row, while Justin Back's family waits for justice to be served. Case 4. Djaka Sarnaya. Our final case is unlike any other in American criminal history. On April 15, 2013, 19-year-old Djaka Sarnaev transformed from a seemingly ordinary college student into one of the most notorious terrorists on U.S. soil. Sarnaev had been living what appeared to be a typical American teenage life. He was a student at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, had friends, and seemed to be integrating into American society after immigrating from Kyrgyzstan with his family. But behind this facade, he was being radicalized by his older brother Tamerlan, who had embraced extremist Islamic ideology. The brothers spent months planning their attack on one of Boston's most cherished traditions, the Boston Marathon. They built pressure cooker bombs filled with nails, ball bearings, and other shrapnel, designed to maximize casualties among the innocent spectators lining the race route. On Patriots' Day, as thousands of runners approached the finish line and families cheered from the sidewalks, the Tsarnaev brothers positioned themselves in the crowd. At 2:49 p.m., their first bomb exploded near the finish line. 13 seconds later, the second bomb detonated further down Boylston Street. The explosions killed 3 people instantly: 8-year-old Martin Richard, 23-year-old Lindsay Liu, and 29-year-old Crystal Campbell. More than 260 others were wounded, with many losing limbs in the blast. The images of blood-soaked pavement and victims being rushed to hospitals in wheelchairs became seared into America's collective memory. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. The FBI released surveillance photos of the suspects, and within days the brothers were identified. On April 18, they killed MIT police officer Sean Collier during their attempt to flee. The next day, a massive shootout in Watertown resulted in Tamerlan's death, but Dzhokhar escaped, hiding in a boat in a residential backyard. When police finally captured him, Dzhokhar was bleeding and barely conscious. Inside the boat, investigators found a message he had written justifying the attack as retaliation for U.S. military actions in Muslim countries. The federal trial began in 2015 with prosecutors seeking the death penalty. Despite his defense team's arguments about his brother's influence and his young age, the jury found Tsarnaev guilty on all 30 counts and sentenced him to death. The case has bounced through the appeals courts ever since. In 2020, the First Circuit Court of Appeals overturned his death sentence, citing jury selection issues. However, the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 2022, ruling 6-3 that the lower court had applied the wrong legal standard. As recently as 2024, the First Circuit ordered new inquiries into potential juror bias, keeping Tsarnaev's case in legal limbo. Currently housed at ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado, Tsarnaev remains on federal death row while his attorneys continue fighting his execution. These 4 cases reveal troubling patterns about young adults who commit capital crimes, while exposing deep fractures in how America handles justice for offenders barely out of their teens. What makes these cases particularly complex is timing. In 2005, the Supreme Court ruled in Roper v. Simmons that executing anyone under 18 violates the Constitution, citing scientific evidence about adolescent brain development. But that protection vanishes the moment someone turns 18, creating a legal cliff where a few months can mean the difference between life and death. Pike, Bargo, Myers, and Sarnaev all committed their crimes within months of reaching legal adulthood. Modern neuroscience shows that brain development, particularly in areas controlling impulse and decision-making, continues well into the mid-20s. Yet the law draws a hard line at 18, treating these offenders as fully mature adults, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Despite their different backgrounds and crimes, these cases share disturbing similarities. Each involved extensive premeditation. These weren't crimes of passion but carefully planned acts of violence. Pike tortured Slemmer for 30 minutes and kept skull fragments as trophies. Bargo orchestrated an elaborate scheme to lure his victim. Myers planned his robbery murder for days. The Tsarnaev brothers spent months building their bombs. This level of planning challenges the narrative that these were impulsive teenage mistakes. Prosecutors in each case successfully argued that the defendants understood the gravity of their actions and chose violence anyway. Each case has become a testing ground for evolving legal theories about young adult culpability. Defense attorneys increasingly invoke emerging adult research, arguing that 18 and 19-year-olds deserve different treatment than older defendants. They point to studies showing continued brain development and greater susceptibility to peer influence. However, courts have largely rejected these arguments when applied to the most heinous crimes. The brutality in these cases, torture, terrorism, premeditated murder, seems to override concerns about developmental psychology in judicial decision-making. Tsarnaev's federal case highlights another complexity. While states like Tennessee, Florida, and Ohio maintain active death penalty systems, federal executions are rarer and more politically charged. The federal system's different appeals process has kept Tsarnaev alive longer than some state defendants, despite committing arguably the most serious crime. Lost in legal debates are the victims' families, who have endured decades of appeals and delays. Colleen Slemmer's family has waited nearly 30 years for Pike's execution. These prolonged legal battles force families to relive their trauma repeatedly, raising questions about whether the death penalty system serves justice or prolongs suffering. 4 teens. 4 death sentences. 4 cases that continue to challenge our understanding of justice and punishment in America. Krista Pike, now 47, sits in her Tennessee cell as the state's only female death row inmate, nearly 3 decades after torturing Colleen Slemmer to death. Michael Shane Bargo, Jr. awaits his fate in Florida after unanimously being sentenced to die for the brutal murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson. Austin Gregory Myers remains Ohio's youngest death row inmate for his role in restraining Justin Back while his accomplice stabbed him to death. And Johar Tsarnaev continues his legal battles from federal death row, his case bouncing through appeals courts as Boston Marathon bombing survivors watch and wait. These cases force us to confront uncomfortable questions that have no easy answers. Should the justice system treat 18 and 19-year-olds differently than older defendants, even when they commit the most heinous crimes? Does brain science about adolescent development matter when someone plans torture, terrorism, or premeditated murder? At what point does the brutality of a crime override concerns about the offender's age? The victims' families have endured decades of legal proceedings, forced to relive their worst nightmares every time these cases resurface in court. Meanwhile, these condemned young adults have spent their entire adult lives on death row, some aging into middle age while their appeals drag on. The debate over executing young adults reflects broader questions about the death penalty itself. Are we seeking justice, revenge, or deterrence? Can someone who commits unspeakable acts at 18 or 19 ever be redeemed? Or do some crimes permanently forfeit the right to life? These 4 cases will likely continue generating legal battles and moral debates for years to come. They represent the intersection of youth, violence, and ultimate punishment in ways that challenge our most fundamental beliefs about justice. What do you think? Should 18 and 19-year-olds face the death penalty for their crimes, or does their age warrant a different approach to justice? Should the brutality of crimes like these override any consideration of the offender's youth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep examinations of America's most controversial criminal cases.